Hello and welcome to BookFlap Mini Masterclass. I am Martha Jocelyn. I first met E-Train when I was a visiting author at a middle grade book club in British Columbia. I was zooming in from Stratford, Ontario, and E-Train joined us from his home in California. After a lively session, I invited him to be a contributor to the Kids Corner at BookFlap.ca. And we have never looked back. E-Train is a rising star in the kidlit world. He's a sixth grader who sings and plays basketball. As well as sharing book reviews, he is a self-described literacy advocate and host of his own podcast. He also has a YouTube channel, but mostly he is a reader. He has already made books and sharing books the center of his life. As you will hear, he has organized an ongoing drive to collect and distribute books to underserved classrooms. Here he is to pass along some of his enthusiasm and a few wise words about spreading the joy of reading stories. Take it away, E-Train.
Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks, and today I'm here with E-Train. E-Train is a literacy advocate, a book reviewer, podcast host, and fellow book enthusiast. I'm super excited to ask him some questions about his book journey and how he got started and became a member of the writing community. Thanks so much for joining me today, E-Train. So, I don't know many kids who have their own podcast and are doing so much in the book world. How did you get started in all of this? And how did you go from reader to champion for literacy?
That's a really good question. Well, books have always been a part of my life. From my parents reading to me as a baby and toddler, to learning how to read at 2.5, I've just always loved reading. Not only do I love reading, but I also enjoy writing as well. And the whole book review sort of thing started when my 4th grade class was given the assignment to write book reviews on the novels we read to help with writing and reading comprehension. And I just kind of went with it. I loved reading and I loved writing, and when COVID hit, I was stuck at home non-stop. So I started attending virtual book clubs and making video book reviews to share on YouTube. I was combining all of my passions: writing, reading, and of course, talking. I'm not E-Train Talks for nothing. So I had started the idea of creating a podcast, a literacy journey, without even realizing it. I'd carved a book journey path. And soon, I took a podcasting class on a homeschool application called OutSchool, and boom, I created E-Train Talks. And now, I'm interviewing my heroes, authors, and reviewing books, and just having a great time and being me.
I'm really curious to know, what do you think about when you're writing a book review? Well, I always have to think about a lot when I'm writing my book reviews. I start with thinking about the main ideas of the story, the feelings that were evoked, and the challenges that were overcome. I'm someone who really escapes into the story. I usually feel like I'm writing on the drama, adventure, and action. So I take a small part of those feelings and observations, and I use them to help me write my thoughts on the story. I then add some of my own personal opinions on the tale, and close with who I recommend the book to and why I recommend it. I've been really wondering about this one. Do you talk about books differently with kids than adults? That is a great question. I definitely talk about books differently when I'm with kids than when I'm with adults. Because if I'm talking to other kids, or sometimes anybody about books, I need to figure out if they're bookish or if they're reluctant readers. There is a big difference between kids, or people of any age really, who read by choice or read because they're obligated to or forced to. I usually share a less descriptive and just shorter book description with people who aren't book lovers. But when I'm with book enthusiasts like myself, I can share a lot more details and a ton of enthusiasm. I sometimes get the feeling that people think the more excited you get about a book, the better chance a reluctant reader will want to read. But there's actually a lot more to it than that. How do you recommend a fast-paced, page-turning read to someone, especially a kid, if they have trouble reading or are slow readers? Well, too much enthusiasm could actually bring about instant rejection from a reluctant reader. So it's important to know who you're talking to and figure out what the best approach for trying to inspire or motivate them to want to pick up a book and start reading is. Of course, I am all about sharing excitement, especially on my podcast, because that's just a safe place for me to love reading and get super duper excited about all the books I'm reviewing. And now I've actually started recording some shorter reviews. They're around 30 to 60 seconds to try and encourage reluctant readers with shorter reviews. I hope that these new video styles will appeal to different types of readers and inspire more. Do you have any suggestions for kids who are shy but love reading like you and want to share the love of books? This is the question I've been really excited to share my answer to. So I know it can be really hard to talk into a microphone to potentially a lot of people, and I totally get that. Even though I've interviewed over 30 book enthusiasts, including a Newbery Award winner and many New York Times bestselling authors, I still get nervous before each and every interview. I get over my nervousness pretty quickly, but I can imagine how it would feel for someone who's a shy introvert. I like to call myself an introverted extrovert. I get scared, but that scaredness goes away. But for those who are too nervous to start a YouTube channel or podcast, but still love books, I recommend starting a book blog. You don't need to talk to anybody when you're blogging. You can just write about your favorite reads to your heart's content. And book blogs are actually just as, if not more popular than book podcasts. So there's no reason to feel ashamed if you don't want to host a book podcast or YouTube channel. Now that you've read many middle grade books, are there any tropes or genres that have become a bit tiresome and repetitive for you? This is a great question, and I have to start off by saying I love all middle grade books. They're all incredibly amazing and just make me smile. But I'd really like to read some stories where the ending isn't always wrapped up in a nice bow. Of course, it feels good to close a book having ended happily, but in real life, especially for middle schoolers, life doesn't really always end nicely. The bullies don't usually become friends with the kids they pick on or learn their lessons at all. The bullied kids can rarely find the courage to stand up to the mean kids at all. And there aren't always friendships waiting to be found and embraced. Now, I'm not saying I'd like to read depressing stories, but maybe a hopeful way to live without having made friends with the bully or knowing that you're not alone if you don't end up with the BFF to share lunch with every day. Stories that can be a friend or a warm hug to kids feeling lost or alone. Besides hosting a podcast or a book blog, what are some other ways we can be literacy advocates? I love this question. There are so many ways you can be literacy advocates, and you don't need to have a podcast, blog, or anything like that. To start, you can just share a book you've read. By sharing book recommendations and being a book lover, you're motivating and inspiring others to read. That's awesome. It's like the butterfly effect, and who knows, maybe your little spark of bookishness may truly brighten up someone else's day. And if you want to do more, you can also volunteer at your local library or your bookstore. Spread the word about all things reading to your peers and everybody you meet. And most importantly, read. Of course, you can start a podcast too, but to be an advocate, you don't need to have a large social media following or know lots of people. Just by being you, book-loving, amazing you're being a literacy advocate. What's the worst thing a parent or teacher can do when urging a kid to read and end up turning them off instead? This is a question I get asked a lot. And I always say that you shouldn't force your kid to read a book they don't want to read. By forcing them to read a book they aren't interested in, you're making them feel like reading is a punishment. Another thing I'd like to tell teachers and parents alike is don't discourage them from what they're reading. Just don't. Don't think of a Minecraft book, for instance, as a mind-rotting, no-substance novel. Think of it as the start of a book journey. Be supportive. Walk a mile in their shoes, just like you always tell them to do. What is the best thing a parent or teacher can do to inspire their kids to read? I think the best thing a parent, teacher, librarian, or anyone can do to urge a kid to read is to find out what the kid is passionate about. Whether it's sports, music, video games, space, mythology, anything, let the kid's interest drive the reading experience. I think that reading is a journey, not a destination. And the more you remember that there can be many destinations along the way, there's no need to worry where the kid starts, as long as they're on a reading path. So don't get mad if they're not reading Little Woman when they're 5 years old. They're on a path. Embrace the path. So, E-Train, are you doing any writing currently, or are you too busy with school and your amazing podcast? Of course, I don't have as much time as I used to write, but I'm always trying to make time to write stories. I've been working on short stories, essays, and of course, book reviews. I've started many short or maybe long novels, but I don't get very far into them when I have another idea for another book. I get that a lot. But I do enjoy writing, and I try to write as much as I can. I'm sure a lot of us listening, we want to know what's the best writing advice you've received from authors. I've received so many great ideas and words of wisdom from all of the authors, writers, and just book enthusiasts in general I've talked with. But the one piece of advice that I know is really important and also is the most challenging for me is to finish what you write. Finish something. Nearly every published author I've spoken to has advised me to finish a story, whether long or short. Just try hard to finish. And it's amazing advice. I've now actually started to write short stories so I can just stay focused and reach the finish line. When you finish a story, that is the best feeling ever. Now it's time for my final question of the interview. What's next for you? I have many bookish projects in the works, and I'm extremely proud of them. This summer, I've been leading a book drive for both Title I schools and other schools in my community. And I've received nearly 200 novels, picture books, and chapter books from book enthusiasts everywhere so far. I'm also starting a storybook read-aloud series where I go to local independent bookshops and bookstores and read aloud picture books. And soon, I'll have my own little free library to just have some books out in the community, and they're free books for kids who ever pass by. And I'm always accepting book donations for my book drive and soon to be little free library. So feel free to visit my website for more information. And on the topic of interviews, I'm also continuing with my book reviews and interviews. And soon I'll be interviewing a few of my all-time favorite authors, like B.B. Alston, Alan Gratz, and Jen Kalanita. And of course, I'm still waiting to hear from one of my all-time favorite Canadian authors, Gordon Corman. It would be an honor to chat with him on my podcast too. That's what's new with me and what's coming up. You know, E-Train, we have a lot in common. And to all of you listening, you can follow E-Train's journey at www.etraintalks.com. There you can find all his book reviews, interviews, and everything he does. That's bye for now.